I want to dig into these 3 filters from K&F Concept, which I received for free to review, as well as just dig into these sorts of filters in general. A single-purpose filter versus a dual-purpose filter versus a triple-purpose filter. Versus, I suppose, just stacking multiple filters if I get to it. Is any of this worth the trouble in the first place? Yes, it's worth the trouble. To me, I own quite a few filters. I mean, a lot, actually. Some cheap, some absurdly expensive. Yes, it's worth the trouble. But it's situational. This is a variable ND filter. Its one and only function is to restrict the flow of light into your lens hole. But why? Well, maybe you want to shoot wide open in bright sun, f1.2 in this case. Even at my lowest ISO and my fastest shutter speed, that would not be possible ordinarily with my camera. Notice this has kind of a soft focus look to it. Why is that? Why indeed? Sorry, I don't mean to be patronizing. I'm sure you already know the answer, just bear with me, please. Maybe you want to do some shutter dragging, light painting, intentional camera movement. Well, you've got to restrict the amount of light getting into your lens hole, or you'll just have a bright white exposure. And the links for these filters will be in the video description. I'm going to slow this down. Look at the road on the right and the truck on the left. Notice anything missing? Motion blur, that's what's missing. Without motion blur, video can look a bit off-putting, harsh, unpleasant, especially at 24 frames per second, which is my preferred frame rate. This sign should not look this sharp. It breaks the illusion of movement. I mean, there's a time for everything, but this is not the time. This, however, looks much better, to my eyes anyway, because we have motion blur, authentic motion blur. I was able to use a much slower shutter speed because I stopped the aperture way down to f16. But now, instead of the dashboard falling out of focus, it has way too much detail. It's kind of annoying, distracting, but everything in photography is a compromise. Same is true for videography. Cut to, now I've got a slow shutter speed to get some motion blur back in there, and a reasonably out of focus dashboard, courtesy of a not completely but fairly wide open aperture of f2.2. And I was able to accomplish that by using this variable ND filter to partially block the light, no longer simply relying on shutter, aperture, and ISO alone. From an exposure triangle, now we're dealing with an exposure square. We'll call this filter 1, a single-purpose variable ND. Very useful for photographers and videographers alike. Oh, but what's this? This is also a variable ND filter, which means neutral density. And it's a circular polarizing filter, or CPL. It's a dual-purpose filter, which eliminates the need to stack 2 filters together. If you need both of these things going on at once, this is an elegant way of getting there. What does a CPL give you that a variable ND alone doesn't? As you'll see here, it's darkening just the sky, leaving the land mostly untouched. That's helpful. In certain circumstances, it can reduce or eliminate reflections, glare. It can enhance color saturation. Again, darkening the skies here, it's a useful tool for black and white photography also. It can give you deeper, more dramatic skies. More contrast, less contrast, depending on the situation. Not unlike certain types of infrared photography. But that can be expensive and a giant pain. Cool, though. Not a lot of reflective surfaces out here in the desert, but here's the CPL in action on my car. Notice it's reducing the reflections of the clouds. Actually, watching it back now, I can see that I kind of turn it just a bit too far, past the point where I was getting maximum cloud erasure, but it's ridiculously bright out here. Kind of hard to see the screen on my camera. Okay, and now it's not bright at all, and so I can't use that as an excuse, but I'm doing it again anyway. Anyway, it's super effective in removing reflections, to the point where the autofocus here has to adjust. It switches from focusing on the clouds to the steering wheel. forgive all the camera movement. I'm turning the circular polarizing filter. See the sky getting darker and lighter, especially in the upper right corner. So that's the variable ND as opposed to a standard ND with a fixed amount of light reduction, plus CPL, dual purpose filter, which we'll refer to from here on out as filter 2. You likely have or will encounter, possibly rely upon, these types of filters in your photography, in your videography. I mean, maybe not, but my point is they're not niche. These are very typical filters to own. The third is a variable ND, and it's a CPL, and it adds an additional thing. It's a triple purpose filter, saving you from stacking 3 filters on top of each other. It adds something a bit more interesting this time, and probably not for everyone, although probably more popular among videographers than photographers. Light diffusion, or mist, or black mist. It scatters some of the light. It causes highlights to bloom, glow, lowers contrast a bit, softens details. It kind of reduces that overly sharp, characteristic digital look. Gives you something that feels more organic, more analog maybe. This is a 1/4 strength black diffusion mist filter, which is my preferred amount in this particular line of filters. Hey, remember that no X cross shadow sticker on the outside of all the filter boxes? Well, here's a filter I've owned for a long time that does have an X cross shadow. Granted, with a filter like this, you can potentially get them even darker than the no X filters, but remember when I wasn't quite dialing in the CPL perfectly because I couldn't see the screen well enough? Well, that's one thing with a CPL, but when you're dialing in your variable ND and you get those dark bands creeping in, they will simply ruin your shots. See the extra light bloom that filter 3 gives you? Love it. Don't love the shot though. I'm just trying to find an opportunity to demonstrate the filter. And I love what the filter does. I prefer variable NDs to limit me to their guaranteed effective range. Nice, very subtle, but definitely a bit more of an atmospheric something or other going on with even these ones where I'm not shooting into bright light. And diffusion is very flattering if you're shooting people, but overall the key is to get one that's pretty subtle. It does though, this triple purpose filter. I mean, I'm colorblind, but there's definitely a color shift to it. Reminds me of my grandpa's old 8mm films. It's almost a full-on nostalgia filter with bloom plus warmer tones. I did notice that filter 1 and 2 are listed on Amazon as true color, whereas the third is not, filter 3 here. So I don't know if it was by design that filter 3 has a bit of a color shift, but it's definitely clearly marketed as different from the other two in that regard. All 3 filters are ND2-32. Another way of expressing that is to say 1 stop to 5 stops of light reduction. Still another way of expressing it is it's filtering out 1/2 of the light that would otherwise be getting in, turned all the way in one direction, and filtering out 97% of the light that would otherwise be getting in, turned all the way in the other direction. I haven't been presenting this in a very chronological order thus far, but from here on I'm going to. I wanted to introduce the filters, but now this is the first stuff that I actually shot with them. And this trip out was a complete bust. I had a plan. I was going to shoot video or photos, whatever, but do split screens, side by sides, comparing the filters. But what would I be comparing exactly? Once I started shooting, that entire methodology just ceased to make any sense to me. Here lately, my camera bag is like 65% survival supplies, 35% photography gear. I think I need a bigger bag. I determined I was thinking about the whole thing way too literally. Sometimes it's really challenging for me to get started on something. I waste a lot of time initially, but then once I get into a rhythm, the rest goes quick. This sucked. I was trying to get up to the horizon there. It's a big drop off, but I was blocked from getting there. So I just decided to start here, and this is the next day. But forgetting the revelation that I had made on the previous day, here I am once again trying to do the split screen thing. Capture the same video with all 3 filters, plus once with no filter. in 8K no less, in order to zoom in, check sharpness. I end up going back to 4K rather quickly though, but I can attest to the fact that the sharpness is really good. So, if you like a super sharp image, no problem there. But then I lost the light halfway through the 4 identical shots I needed to get. So frustrating, so I couldn't complete the test. But again, I am just being too literal about this. I remembered, oh yeah, decided not to do this. So I moved on, backtracked actually. This is not to be a test, nor a comparison exactly. Much more just an example of real world use. So I'm going to shoot some stills, and with the stills, it's super easy to shoot wide open, even at f1.2 or f1.4 with this filter, should I choose to do so. All the POV shots and the walking shots are just with a small wearable camera, not with my mirrorless, no ND filter. I wish. That would just be way too complicated. I mean, if I were filming your wedding, I would certainly do so with more care, but for my online stuff, where I'm demonstrating stuff, yeah, I cut some corners. Or this would just be miserable, and I wouldn't do it anymore. I mean, filming yourself filming is complicated. To get the most pleasing looking motion blur, because it's certainly possible to go too far with it, you want your shutter to be as close as possible to double your frame rate. So that's 1/50th of a second for me, because I shoot at 24 frames per second. See the nice bloom we're getting here? Thank you, Filter 3. I mean, the shot itself, the subject, or my composition, not really that interesting, but I like the bloom a lot. The black mist filter kind of seems to improve highlight roll-off. It's more graduated, with the added benefit of making the blown areas look very intentional. But anyway, at 1/50th of a second, that's letting in so much light, even though the filter is capable of eliminating 97% of the light that would otherwise be getting in. It's still not enough to shoot wide open. Not with a fast prime, anyway. With stills, it's not a problem, because one's shutter speed does not need to stay locked to 1/50th of a second. You have a lot more flexibility to block or reduce the amount of light getting in the more standard, built-in sorts of ways. So here's how I address it with video, how I've always addressed it. I add a standard non-variable ND behind the variable ND. It's not an arbitrary limitation imposed by K&F CONCEPT, like they're withholding those few additional stops of light reduction from you. 5 stops, or ND32, is generally the practical limit for a variable ND filter. At least one without a built-in base ND, but pushing past that introduces cross-polarization artifacts like the X pattern. Physics is not always on your side, sadly. So for the remainder of the video I shoot today, I'll be doing so with the standard ND I have, sitting behind the variable ND. This is how I would typically be shooting video with my mirrorless camera, so that's what I'm going to do from here on out. Filter 3 is really cleverly designed, more so than Filter 2, in my opinion, in terms of how you control the ND and the CPL on one ring. Here I'm using Filter 3, and for stills I will exclusively be using Filter 3, but with video I'll switch it up. I believe there do exist some variable ND filters that have a base ND of however many stops, plus the ability to go beyond it with the variable portion of it. And that's certainly cool. This approach is also fine, though. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything in particular. Although I'm doing it today, often I do not shoot video wide open. I shoot photos wide open a lot more than I do video, because a very, very super shallow depth of field can be annoying at times with videography, but it just depends. 2.0, 2.2 is where I often land with videography, though that's still often not possible unless I add that second ND filter. But I started out thinking I'd be choosing which of these filters best serves my needs, which one that I want to keep, but I realized that it's not that simple. I kind of think all 3 serve my needs very well, but in different ways, different circumstances. So I don't choose one, I choose all 3 of them. But if I could only choose one, I suppose it would be Filter 3 for me personally. because I have a diffusion filter, a very expensive one, in fact, from another brand, but I don't much care for it. I like this one a lot more. But I'm glad I went in with the wrong impression, because I came out with a lot more knowledge and experience. This is my tiny little wearable, non-pro camera with no ND filter, so the movement looks a little bit more janky, but not too bad because it is stabilized with a tiny gimbal. A different concept, I realize, but we're limiting motion, so it doesn't look as bad. Filter 1, filter 2, filter 3, filter 1. See, I did do a side-by-side comparison, after all. And this is filter 3 plus the extra ND filter on the back of it. Did you notice the difference? So there was a difference besides the color shift with filter 3. 2 was darker than 1, and 3 was lighter than 1. Not that it matters all that much, but interesting nonetheless. Yes, I got a little fixated on this lone tree sticking out of the rock. Again, all stills are shot with filter 3. But another circumstance where I'd use an ND filter for still photography is when I'm shooting flash or strobe outdoors, specifically portraits, with a background of sky, clouds, that sort of thing. I'd use the ND to remove as much of the available light as I could, and then I'd use the flash to light the person. Yes, highly fixated on this tree. Here's the caveat with a CPL filter. Physics is here again to ruin your day. Facing the sun doesn't do much. Facing away from the sun doesn't do much. It works at 90-degree angles, like here and here, 90-degree angles from the sun. That's in terms of darkening the sky, at least. For reflections, it's much more difficult to predict. There's a lot more to consider, more calculations than I could possibly do in my head. So I kind of just walk around and find the right angle that works. In the middle of the day, noon, I must admit, as much as possible, I try to avoid shooting in the middle of the day. So I can't speak with much expertise about what a CPL does at noon. But since the sun is directly overhead, all directions along the horizon would be 90 degrees from the sun. So I'm assuming it will darken the horizon, but that there will be a gradient, and it would get brighter the higher up you go in the frame. Hopefully I'm not giving you bad information there. And again, the design of filter 3 is brilliant. Loosen the screw, you're turning the CPL. Tighten it, the variable ND, with that same little nub. Yeah, I really do like filter 3. It's not just a glow effect, it actually softens the transition from bright to dark, makes the highlights feel less clipped. It is less apparent that it's doing something in the shadows and in the midtones. It is doing something though, it's just subtle. I'm getting a look closer to that of an old DSLR, in my opinion, which I'm all in favor of. That is to say, a softer image with a bit more personality straight out of the camera. Modern cameras are much more about neutrality. Then again, sometimes I want neutrality, so then I could just take the filter off. I know I come out here too much, but I genuinely love this area. So one last little CPL demo, darkening the sky. Wish I had stopped down to shoot this. Looks not so great, wide open. So the sun started going down, started to get a bit stormy looking. So I was thinking maybe I'd try to capture some lightning, or maybe a time lapse. And I ended up doing both, but I wish I had just chosen one or the other, because I feel like they both suffered as a result. But I used filter 3 for the time lapse. Had I started the time lapse a half a second earlier or later, I would have captured like 15 lightning strikes. Instead, I just kept barely missing them by a fraction of a second. But then the wind got so bad that it blew my camera over. I mean, I caught it, I was standing right there, but that's when I packed up and went home. So check the link below the video if you're interested in any of these filters. And thank you K&F Concept for providing them. And I did manage to capture a lightning strike And the lightning itself looks good. I like the haze around it, thanks to my friend Filter 3. But I do not like the composition of this shot, and I'm not too keen on the exposure either. But I would absolutely love to do more of this, and I'm sure I will very soon.